Can I do an announcement before you start?
No.
Alright.
But thanks for answering.
Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
Our sister parish in Anaheim, Annunciation. We have news from them.
Yes.
Turner's not listening. We have news from our sister parish in Anaheim, Annunciation. There could be one in between, but there will be another SoCal Byzantine Retreat Day. And that will be Saturday, February 3rd, 2024, 10 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. This up next year event will be led by the Franciscan Society for Renewal, CFR, by Father Malachi. He is one of the speakers chosen by the USCCB to do the Year of the Eucharistic Revival. And he actually went to a Melkite church when he was growing up in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. So, and then Brother Simeon he's also Byzantine, and he's coming to that same event. So there's two speakers.
What speaker? But he's just coming to.
Oh, he's just going to be there. So the main speaker is Father Malachi. So anyway, I just wanted you to know, Saturday, February 3rd, at Annunciation, starting at 10 a.m.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for announcing that. We'll get more Okay.
All right.
We're ready.
Okay. Oh, I better unplug this.
Oh, you can unplug it now. It's charged.
Okay. All right. So here's part two. So for part two, I'm going to go over briefly the situation in Eastern Europe, the reduction of the Greek, which you heard some of that from Father Artur, the reduction of the Greek Catholic Church, Communist Hungary and Yugoslavia, changes in the USA, Vatican Council II, and the creation of the Metropolia of Pittsburgh, and then the whole drive for evangelization. That's what we're going to end with. All right, so at the end of World War II, because of the way things had worked out during the war, the Red Army had gone this far into much of Europe. And the agreement that they made with America, Great Britain, at Yalta was they partitioned Europe, basically. Stalin wanted a cordon sanitaire, he called it, to keep Western powers away. He didn't want another invasion like they had in 1941, when Germany invaded them with a surprise attack. And of course, he was committed to expanding communism, and expanding communism meant expanding atheism. Expanding atheism meant persecution of religion. So we forget now just how far communism went. This is Berlin here, in the middle of the German Democratic Republic. And Yugoslavia is in purple because it was technically unaligned until 1948. It broke with the Soviet Union over communist policies, but it remained a communist country. And of course, Albania was the worst of all of them. Extremely hostile to religion there. Okay, so the big thing, as you heard probably with Father Artur, is that the Russian Orthodox Church collaborated with Stalin. Why? It was an attempt that by destroying the Greek Catholic churches once and for all, that they would be forced back into Orthodoxy. And of course, Russian Orthodoxy was cooperating with the Stalinist state in order to try and survive on its own. It was also an attempt to increase the power and size of the Moscow Patriarchate by taking over the various national Orthodox churches in the three Baltic states, which used to have their own independent Orthodox churches, and in Poland and Czechoslovakia. And fulfilling Moscow's dreams of pushing out and pushing back all Western ideas out of the Russian culture and dominating the Soviet Union with just Russian Orthodoxy as the only really acceptable church. And cooperation hopefully would guarantee lessening of state persecution of the Orthodox. That never happened. all of the Orthodox churches in all of the communist countries all experienced varying degrees of persecution. They never had full liberty of existence. So it was a failure on the part of the Russian Orthodox to do this. It was a failure on the part of the Romanian Orthodox. They also collaborated to go along with this because in the end, their priests still ended up in prison. They still didn't have all their monasteries and seminaries that were promised them and so forth. And it was a fulfillment also comes into play of communist ideology since 1926, that it denied that there was any such thing as a Carpatho-Russian identity, with the goal of making the Russians into Ukrainians. So in Czechoslovakia, you had a Ruthenian Ukrainian identity, with again the goal that not to bolster the Ukrainians, but that the Ukrainians eventually would become Russified, and become more and more aligned with Russia. And then that's what we see today, with the war. And dominating, that the Russian identity would dominate among the Slavs. All right, these two bishops both get killed. Blessed Theodore Ramsha, of course, was killed on October 31st, 1947. And then Blessed Petro Oros was shot in 1953. You can read about both of them in the book that will give you more detail. Ramsha had consecrated two secret bishops that we know of, Petro Oros and Alexander Hira. In 1944, Hira was arrested after Ramsha was killed and deported to Siberia in the Gulag, and then Petro Oros, he went up into the mountains with a number of priests and he organized the underground church throughout the Subcarpathian region, and was publicly executed in 1953. All right, so in the United States, interesting situation. The church has disappeared behind the Iron Curtain. Church in Czechoslovakia was completely suppressed in 1950. The church in Subcarpathian Rus completely suppressed in 1949. There's no more immigration coming out from Eastern Europe. It had already dwindled significantly because of the American exclusionary laws that were passed in the 1920s. Whereas you had in 1920, you had thousands of people coming from Czechoslovakia. You had a population of, let me see here. In 1924, the quota for Czechoslovakia was reduced from 14,000 per year to 3,000 per year. So it was almost impossible for people to get here. I had a couple in New Jersey. He immigrated, got his quota number. He immigrated in 1938, came to America, was going to send back for his wife and children once he got citizenship. But World War II came. He did not see them again until 1980. 1980. They were inside the Soviet Union. She suffered terribly because she was married to an American, even though he was originally from there. Their son suffered the same way, and it took him all that time after World War II to get his wife and son out. By the time they came out, the son came with his wife and their children. So Ignaz, he met all these children that Ivan had, all his grandchildren. He had never met them. He wasn't even sure how many he had. The isolation of these people was just so sad of what they went through. All right, so what happens? In the United States, Bishop Ivancho was a very forward-looking bishop and very progressive in a lot of ways. But Bishop Ivancho had a secret, and he was married. He had contracted a civil marriage with a nurse who took care of him after one of his heart attacks. And he had to be removed as a result. And Bishop Nicholas Elko came on board and became the first American-born bishop. Now, this was then in the 50s, and this was the last big Latinization drive, and this really affected our church profoundly. Why Latinization? Latinization is imposing Latin practices or government or theology and worship styles into an Eastern Catholic Church. And the reason they would do this is that the Latin church was seen as superior, right? Because it was the church of Western Europe and North America, the church, the culture that really was ruling the world. Was seen as superior in size, as superior in theology, and in ritual. And it actually was taught like that in schools, that the Latin church is the mother of all the churches, and the Greek church and other churches are inferior. There was a great desire in the United States to be accepted as equals, right, by the Latin majority. And that was very important. There was, of course, we were still having the expansion of English in worship, which the Latin Rite was not having at that time at all. That doesn't come until the late 1960s. There was a growing rate of intermarriage, ethnic intermarriages, as well as conversions, continually growing number of conversions, and a lot of ritual transfers. A lot of people starting to come into the Byzantine Catholic Church canonically. They were trying to stop this hemorrhage of vocations into Latin religious orders. And you see this lament over and over and over again in books and newspaper articles from the time period. There's so many women and young men joining Latin religious orders and being lost to our church. And so the priests went about, as early as the 1930s, really creating new rituals for Lenten devotions. Pre-sanctified liturgy had disappeared completely. Never really made it to America. Stations of the Cross were created. Benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. I used to do this as a young priest. It was very emotional, actually. It was a pretty impressive service, I got to say. Devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Implementation of the Rosary, expanded. And then a much greater introduction of statues into churches, and a forced demolition of iconostasis, one of the worst things. They tore down icon screens that had been brought over from Austria-Hungary at such great expense, and tore them down and would burn them in the parking lots. And it was awful. Or they would take out the icons and hang them on the walls in the hall, but the framework was all destroyed. So I had a lady in New Jersey, she told me once, she said, "Father, I'll tell you what, I don't know what I am, religion-wise." And I said, "You're Byzantine Catholic." And she said, "Nah." She says, "I was born in Europe. We had a beautiful church with a full iconostas up to the ceiling. It was great. I emigrated to America. We built a church in Pennsylvania, built a new church, iconostas up to the ceiling. That was great. Got married there. We moved to New Jersey, built a new church here, built an iconostas up to the ceiling. Then a priest came in. He took off the top part. He said, 'This is Greek Catholic.'" And I said, "Okay." And another priest came in. He took out the curtains and the doors, and he said, "This is Greek Catholic." I said, "Okay." Then another priest came, and he took out all the banners and put in statues of Jesus and Mary in front of the icon screen, and he said, "This is Greek Catholic." And I said, "Okay." And then we built a new church, and it was a big open church, and there was no icon screen, and there were no icons, and there were statues. And the priest said, "This is Greek Catholic." And I said, "Okay." And then we got the new priest, and he put in an iconostas, he took out the statues, he put in the banners, the iconostas goes up to the ceiling, and he said, "This is Greek Catholic." And I said, "I think I'm Presbyterian." But that was the process that these people went through in a very short span of time. From the 1930s up until the 1970s. And that's a lot to have happen to you. So if you ever came from a parish, that went through some of this, you have a better understanding how hard it was for people. And it was tough. And how important it is to learn the history and the theology of why we do what we do. That everything has a reason and a purpose. So this is a really good example of the churches that were built in this time period. St. Peter and Paul in Braddock, Pennsylvania, has a big baldacchino over the altar, 6 candlesticks on the altar around the tabernacle in the style of the old Latin Rite. Beautiful church, beautiful art and everything. Icons over on the side, and Sacred Heart of Jesus and Our Lady of Grace, angels and so forth. That's the kind of, you walk in there and it doesn't look Byzantine at all. There's very little, yeah. But it's built to look like a Latin church. The only thing Byzantine in here, besides the frescoes, is the cross up on top of the baldacchino, right? And all of this was done really partly out of an inferiority complex, also because how they had been treated for so long. That they weren't really Catholic. And the feeling was if we look more Roman Catholic, things will be better for us. All right, so we had the big expansion during this time period into the south and into the west. Now, I worked for 4 years at St. Gregory Church in Beltsville, Maryland. And the people who founded the church told me about how when they went as young workers who'd been recruited by the federal government in the big post-war boom, and they went to Pittsburgh and they met with Bishop Elko, and they told him they wanted a church in Washington, D.C., and he said, oh, that's too far south. And of course, now we have churches, at the base of Florida. That's just you're too far away. You're too far away from everything. And they said, well, we have all these families, young couples, we're having kids, we want to preach. And so they eventually got the church. And out of that one group, 4 parishes were founded in Baltimore, Washington, Maryland, and Virginia. And then, of course, out here, Father Cremoga came out on the train. He was sent out to, there were a couple families in Los Angeles. First number he called was disconnected. Guy's out here all alone, doesn't know anybody, and gets the little recording. That number's been disconnected. Call the second. He only had 2 numbers. Call the second number. People were home. They drove down to Union Station, picked him up, and that's how St. Mary's got founded up in Sherman Oaks. And then Father Rodella followed him, and of course this is how San Diego gets founded at this time frame. And Fontana. Gradually they go out into Alaska, and then you have the move coming out into Ohio, out of Cleveland, Michigan, out of Detroit. The church is in Arizona, moving into the suburbs around Pittsburgh. And then in the 70s and 80s, you get this whole network of churches in Florida. And then new parishes out west again, California, Colorado, New Mexico. It was really hard for people to get their head around this, that we were going to be a truly national church all over the United States. All right? And I remember when they started asking for priests to come to Florida, I was at a deanery meeting in New Jersey, and one of the priests said, who's going to go down there? They're all old people. They're not going to last very long in Florida. And well, we're going to go down there, we're going to put all this money in there, we're going to build, and they're all going to die. It's just retirement community. But of course, once mom and dad moved down to Florida, well, then the kids moved down to Florida, and the kids got married, and the kids had grandkids, and they, created this whole thing. Plus, Florida is where you had Spanish introduced for the first time, in Miami at St. Basil's Church. And again, the idea of people intermarrying, conversions, ritual transfers, this huge expansion, of the Byzantine Catholic Church. And all of these parishes that are founded by the laity. And that's really important for where I'm going with this half of the presentation. Everything in America was founded by lay people. The lay people came first. They organized themselves into congregations. Then they wrote back to Europe for priests. Then, once there was a bishop in this country, wrote to the bishop for a priest. They were very energetic and very committed and wanted their own parishes and their own worship. So, by 1969, the Ruthenian Church exists in full freedom only in the United States of America. In Hungary, there was one eparchy that was really under communist control. In Yugoslavia, one eparchy for all those different nationalities. Czechoslovakia, just starting to come out of the underground because of the Prague Spring, very partially restored. And then in Soviet Union, there was nothing public whatsoever. This was the size of our church at the time in 1969 when the Holy See creates the metropolitan province of Munhal, right, which is now the Archeparchy of Pittsburgh. 80 parishes in Pittsburgh, Munhal, 80 parishes in Passaic, 53 parishes in Parma, because Parma, of course, came all the way out here at that time. Parishes included filial churches that were served from a mother church. So not every church had its own resident priest. There was still a large number of churches that were being served by one priest who had 2 or 3 churches. in these parishes. They had, diocesan or secular clergy, right, along with a Franciscan community was founded, and a Benedictine community of men was founded. And there were monasteries of the Basilian Fathers who had escaped from Hungary in Matawan, New Jersey, the Franciscans in Pennsylvania, Benedictines in Pennsylvania, and then individual guys who had joined the Jesuits, Salesians, and Redemptorists and had little groups within those big communities. And then the Sisters of St. Basil the Great had multiple convents and schools in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New Jersey. And the Sisters of Christ the Teacher were founded by Bishop Elko to be a more modern community, a more modern style of habit. Sisters of St. Benedict in Youngstown, Ohio, Poor Clare Nuns in Ohio, and then the Carmelites in Pennsylvania. The only ones that still exist now today are the Sisters of St. Basil the Great and the Carmelites. The other three communities are extinct, unfortunately. All right. So, Elko was removed by the Holy See. There was lots of complaints about Bishop Elko, of how he treated the clergy in particular, and how he handled the parishes. And people were getting more in touch with their Eastern Christian heritage, and Elko was really uncomfortable with that. So the Holy See appoints two bishops at this time, Kosciuszko and Dudek. This is before Parma is created. And this is the putting on the brakes of Latinization. They both had Roman educations. They both were very committed to the Byzantine Rite in its integrity. And they both were willing to work with starting to restore things. So they stopped Latinization. They start turning the clock back. Right? Start telling priests you can put in the iconostas, you're building a new church, you can have an iconostas. And they start pushing for services to be restored. So it's a slow, steady restoration of more traditional worship. The pre-sanctified liturgy was translated into English. Akathist became popular to Jesus and Mary. Molebens to our Lord and Our Lady, dropping the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament that had been added on at the end. The catechetical congresses of laity were really important. They weren't just for religious ed teachers. These were congresses that were held around the country with lay people coming together in different parishes. And this was the first real outbreak of youth ministry in our church. I was really involved in this stuff. And young adult ministry for the first time in our church. So it was a very exciting time in the late 70s and throughout the 80s as all of these things are coming back. I was in a parish in Buffalo where I had never heard the sanctification of water in English, ever. It was always done in Church Slavonic. Very impressive. I had no idea what was going on. And then I go down to Washington, D.C., and my glory, this was awesome. This was fantastic. Invoking the power of the Holy Spirit of God into the water. That's the kind of thing lots of people were experiencing. And the pre-sanctified, I had never seen pre-sanctified liturgy until I moved to Washington. And, it's a magnificent service, one of the best things we do. So powerful, so moving. And the music is so beautiful. So we have the English really expanding, Slavonic and Hungarian really declining because the pastoral need for them is disappearing. All right. And introduction of Spanish in Miami in the 1960s and translating the whole Divine Liturgy into Spanish. It was a parish that had a lot of Cuban refugees drawn to it. They loved the Byzantine Rite, and they just really liked it. And then slowly we had the restoration of Lenten and discipline, the fasting and abstinence rules start to come back. And the God With Us catechetical program was created in the 70s for the K through 8. And then the Sisters of St. Basil published books for Matins and Vespers, translating all of the different canons and odes and so forth into English. So a lot went on. It was a very dynamic time period. All right. The Second Vatican Council, of course, was held in the early 60s. And one of the things they did at the Vatican Council was that there was a daily liturgy at the high altar in St. Peter's Basilica. And the high altar is where the Pope says Mass. All right? That's the only one was supposed to be up there, was the Pope. And Pope John the 23rd had a very good appreciation of the Eastern churches, as did Pope Paul VI. And so they had all of the Eastern bishops who came to Rome for the council offer the liturgy in the different Eastern traditions at the high altar under the big baldacchino. And the bishop from Hungary offered the liturgy in modern Hungarian, and Bishop Elko from America offered the liturgy in modern English. And it was an eye-opener for the Latin bishops that you could have vernacular worship done well and done beautifully. And it was an eye-opener for them of the beauty and richness and diversity of the Eastern Catholics. And this is when you start to see icons appear in Catholic stores more. This is when you see articles show up in Catholic newspapers about the Eastern rites and that they're fully Catholic. And a lot goes on. Orientalium Ecclesiarum is one of the very first documents published in Vatican II. And this is a really critical document for us. There were several months to get it written, but these are the things that it calls for. It restores the mandate for the Eastern Catholics, have a mandate to proclaim the gospel to all people, not one ethnic group, to all people. That we have the obligation, not just the right, but the obligation to proclaim the gospel to everyone. That's really important for us. The call to restore traditional Eastern liturgical and spiritual practices and government wherever it had been abandoned. Well, it had been abandoned everywhere. All the Eastern Catholics were heavily Latinized at this point. Abandon Latinization. No more. So put a stop to it officially. And legitimize diversity of churches within the universal church. No more talking simply about rites. That we are more than a different mass. First steps to rapprochement with the Orthodox churches. You know, the emphasis on being bridges to the Orthodox. And we cannot be bridges to the Orthodox if we do not have our own legitimate spiritual traditions intact. It's still not fully implemented, right? Rome is still very much a centralized church. And, you know, people, I said this the other night at a youth group. I said, you know, I always get a kick out of somebody to come up and ask me, what does Pope Francis think about this, Father? I don't know. I don't talk to Pope Francis. Why would you think I know what Pope Francis thinks about this? But people do. We have a very Pope-centric church, right, for the last 100 and some years as a result of the lopsided natures of Vatican I. But in Orientalium Ecclesiarum, it does call for the patriarchates to have full authority over their particular churches again, and not have to defer to Roman bureaucracy all the time. So this was a really important document. This is really like the Declaration of Independence for Eastern Catholicism. It was a long, slow process to get there, but boy, once they got there and got comfortable with the idea, they really put out a pretty decent document. And this is, you know, this calls into play, obviously, everything that we do out here in the West in particular. 1989, this is the year of miracles. How about this was a great picture. These are East German Volkspolizei, the East German police. The people on the west side of the wall have pulled down a whole section of the wall. Those guys look real enthusiastic about it, don't they? And they are bewildered. What is happening? What is happening? These are the men who 2 days before were shooting at people who tried to get over the Berlin Wall. And now they have been told by their own government to open everything up and that people could go back and forth. For the first time since 1961, people could go back and forth freely. That bewilderment and confusion and anticipation and all those emotions mixed together, that's what happened in Eastern Europe. people were excited, but they were also scared. What was going to take place? And that was really the year of miracles, if you remember, if you were around at that time. You know, when everything changed so fast in Eastern Europe, and when Honecker in East Germany asked Gorbachev to send in the Red Army to stop all of this, Gorbachev said no. He let it go. And that was very, very significant. A huge change from what had happened just in 1968. The year of miracles of all of this opening up, you know, also meant that it was a new breathing space for the Eastern Catholics under communist rule. That year ended with Gorbachev going to Rome, meeting John Paul II in Rome, putting forward information about they're going to do a new law on religious freedom, of actual freedom, and the Pope brought up, I want to see freedom for the Greek Catholics and the Armenian Catholics in the Soviet Union. That was a shock. They thought, the communists thought, that there would be maybe, in all of Ukraine, there might be as many as 50,000 people who would be Greek Catholic. And instead, it was 3 million. And when our priests began offering public liturgies in towns like Uzhhorod, again, you know, the police reports were estimating a few thousand will come, and instead, you know, the streets were packed with people. So it was a shock to the communists just how well the underground had survived. And this is, you know, an ongoing process of people coming into the Greek Catholic Church still in the former communist countries. All right, so within 2 years after the Berlin Wall opened in November of '89, the Soviet Union was gone. New independent countries. Russia began slow changes that unfortunately never went far enough. And in Ukraine had an election in '91 for independence. The vast majority of people voted for independence. In the Transcarpathian district of Subcarpathian Rus, where our Eparchy Mukachevo is from, where Father Artur comes from, they also had another question on the ballot. Would you want an autonomous status, self-governing status for this province, for this oblast? And almost 80% of the people voted yes. But that was never granted by the Ukrainian government. In Czechoslovakia, that country was dissolved completely, and so they needed new church structures for the two new countries of Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And in Mukachevo, his father was talking to you about, you know, the program began in Mukachevo Eparchy to try and regain the old churches that had been given by the state to the Russian Orthodox, you know, with mixed results. Hungarian Church embarked on a really ambitious program of de-Latinization and Byzantinization. Hungarians they've done a lot there with restoring services and so forth like we did, and they had to do it in a much shorter time and really an accelerated program, but they did it well. They've done it well without much of a loss in terms of attendance. And they've also been able to expand their parish network. Yugoslavia, unfortunately, collapsed, you know, into that horrible war, just an incredibly violent civil war, and that was filled with atrocities against minorities and against the Muslims and against the Catholics. And the Greek Catholics suffered badly in this war. There's places, you know, that have never really recovered from everything that happened. So this is the post-Soviet world. In '92, the red is Russia, and then, you know, all of these former constituent republics now became independent countries in Central Asia and along the western frontier. And there's our little corner of the world over here up against Moldova. And, you know, nowadays, unfortunately, we're familiar with the map because of the Russian war, the invasion of Ukraine. All right, the expansion of our church in Europe. So this is what happened. So in Slovakia, they finally are able now, they can move out of the old areas. When people were moved by the government into new cities and new housing estates, the church had not been allowed to follow, even when it was re-legalized in 1968. So now they've got to follow these people. They've got to find these people that have been moved around Slovakia and Czech Republic, track them down, create new missions and new parishes for them. And so 2 new eparchies were founded. First, Košice was created as a little exarchate and was elevated to an eparchy, and then in Bratislava, the capital, a new eparchy was founded. Czech Republic, there were a lot of Ruthenian people that had moved there in the interwar years, in the 20s and 30s, and they had a number of parishes, really vibrant parishes in Prague and Brno. These people needed new parishes as well. A lot of people who had fled in 45 to 48 from Subcarpathian Rus were settled by the government in the territory that the ethnic Germans had been thrown out of. They had had a parish network founded before Czechoslovakia became communist. So there's all kinds of people, Rusin, Slovak, Ukrainian, Czech converts that needed to be served in the Czech Republic. In Hungary, Miskolc had been an exarchate. Now it became an eparchy, and a new eparchy was founded at Nyíregyháza. And then in Yugoslavia, you have all these new countries created. And so the church had to create new structures for Serbia, for Croatia, for Slovenia, for Bosnia and Herzegovina. All of that's under Croatia. Serbia has its own eparchy at St. Nicholas. We saw the cathedral earlier today. And then Assumption of the Virgin eparchy in Skopje for North Macedonia. So a lot had to be done. And you got to provide institutions for all of this. Seminaries and media, religious communities, religious education, and all these languages. So they've been very busy over there. So this is the Metropolia of Prešov the way it is today. Bratislava physically is the biggest, but numerically is the smallest. All right, because it doesn't have that many parishes this way. But the churches it does have are crowded. And Košice is Hungarian, and Slovak, and Prešov is Slovak and Rusin and some Hungarian. And then just west of the blue, that's the Prague Exarchate for the Czech Republic, which again, is another multi-ethnic church. This is the Hungarian Metropolia, so this is where they started in Hajdúdorog, which is now the Archdiocese, the Archeparchy, Nyíregyháza, and Miskolc. So Hajdúdorog has most of the country. This is where most of the Greek Catholics originally lived, but there are parishes all over Hungary now, all the way across the entire country. You can find Greek Catholic parishes. And then this is our Metropolia, which was expanded in 1982 with the creation of the Eparchy of Van Nuys, right, which is now the Holy Protection of Mary of Phoenix. And now we also have Toronto, all right, the Slovak Exarchate of Cyril and Methodius up in Canada. So this is Passaic, Pittsburgh, Parma. Father Pipta is going to have this as his territory, and then Phoenix. And we now have a mission in Hawaii, so we actually do have a presence in Hawaii finally. All right, USA and Canada. In Canada, the eparchy was founded in Toronto under Bishop Michael Rusnak as a Slovak eparchy of Cyril and Methodius back in 1980. Then in 1982, Van Nuys was founded for the Western states. And again, Bishop George Kuzma, at his enthronement sermon, he emphasized this, that we have to give up trying to be an ethnic church. We are a church for all people. And these are some of the big things that happened. Byzantines, right, youth ministry, and national youth ministry started in the 80s. The restoration of infant communion in 1994. And having babies, we take this all for granted now, right? But it was a big deal trying to convince people it was okay to do this. The permanent diaconate, right, which your parishes in San Diego and Anaheim have benefited from. The ongoing revision of liturgical books, promulgation of particular law for the United States under Archbishop Prosek, because we're a unique church, and we're not a European church. The ordination of married men to holy orders, which again your parish has benefited from, and then the theological accreditation of the seminary. When Father Washko and I were seminarians, the seminary did not give a degree. Now it gives recognized academic degrees that are recognized by the state, and that's significant. Right? That means the quality of education there is really good. And that's a big step, and that's what you want. You want your priests to be well-formed. You want guys to come out of there, and your priests and deacons and lay people who go there, you want them to have a good theological, spiritual formation. Now, vocations, that's the big thing. There's been a decline in the religious orders. The Benedictines are gone. The Basilian monks, the ones who are still alive, went back to Hungary. The Basilian sisters are pretty much disappearing, unfortunately. The Poor Clare nuns are gone. Sisters of Christ the Teacher are gone. Most of the monasteries and convents are closed. The Carmelites have rebooted themselves as a more authentically Eastern community in Pennsylvania. And then we had founding of Christ the Bridegroom Monastery in Ohio. Some of you know them. As you know, purely Eastern. The founding sister was in the Basilians, right, and wanted a more Eastern community with a more traditional habit and more traditional prayer life, and that's how Christ the Bridegroom got founded. Big rise in candidacy for permanent diaconate, real big. And the seminary now takes men from the Melkite, Romanian Greek Catholic, and Ukrainian Greek Catholic churches, which is really significant given the history of tension between the Ukrainian and Ruthenian jurisdictions. But there has been a steady decline in numbers of men applying to study for the priesthood from the four eparchies. So, you know, everybody would say, oh, if you get a married clergy back, that'll solve it. That doesn't solve it. It doesn't solve it. That's not the issue. Celibacy is not the issue. Never has been. And then there is, of course, importing foreign clergy, like Father Artur, from Slovakia or Ukraine. That was done for a number of years. But again, you know, that's not a solution either. You know, the question is, why are not men responding to the Holy Spirit here in the United States? What's happened in our church that we don't have that going on? What's wrong? You know, what is the solution to that? If I knew the solution to that, I would make $1 million. But, you know, something to be aware of is we have never had enough priests in this country ever. Well, some of you may have grown up in large Latin parishes. I grew up in a big Latin parish that had, in a church that seats 2,000 people, we had 10 masses on a weekend. That's a lot of people. We had 4 priests. Why? Because after World War II and after the Korean War, there was a flood of Roman Catholic men in the United States and Byzantine Catholics who went into the priesthood. It was a blip. You look at American Catholic history, that was a blip. There have never been enough priests in this country. It has really relied on sisters and lay people. And that's true for the Byzantine Catholics as well as the Roman Catholics. All right, my house should be called a house of prayer for all peoples, Prophet Isaiah. This priest wrote this in 1947. It would appear that the future problems of the Byzantine Slavonic Church will be connected not with questions of discipline and rite, but with neo-paganism, with the growing indifference to God that is menacing all religion in our generation. Talk about a prophet. This is where we are now. We tend to look back on, you know, the TV show Happy Days. Everything was perfect, you know, wonderful time period in American history, the golden era of family life and so forth. My dad was a cop, as I've mentioned. One morning we were little kids. He got a phone call from the chief. He was calling everybody in. Why? Across Sheridan Drive that said, God is dead. 1958. And the chiefs called in all the officers he could find, said, you got to get out here, pull this down before people go into work. They never even saw who put them up. And Sheridan Drive is a huge 8-lane parkway. So what we are experiencing today has its roots in the post-war years. It's not something that suddenly popped up, you know, in this century. This has been building for a long time, this neo-paganism that we're experiencing. And again, the Eastern churches enjoy the same rights and are under the same obligations, also in respect of preaching the gospel to the whole world. There are some who say we have no business receiving converts. That's nonsense. Jesus Christ did not say at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, when he went back to heaven, he did not say, go forth and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit according to the Roman rite. I checked. Right? It's not what my Bible says. No Bible says that. We are under the same obligation. That's really powerful language in the Catholic Church. We are obliged to bring people to Jesus Christ through our church. We are obliged to do it. It's not when your priest tells you, yeah, go out and do this. He's not saying it, because it's a nice flowery thing to say. He's saying it because this is what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. So this is nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not sisters. This is how it was in 2008. The dark blue are states where 33% or more of the population has no religious affiliation. 0. So it was up in New England, Maine, and Vermont, and then the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. Alaska. That was it. That was it. Now look at it now. How much things have changed in 14 years. Our state of New Mexico is 47%. In a state that has a 400-year Catholic history. 47%. California is 45%. Nevada 47%. Oregon 53%. Washington 52%. Montana 51%. Arizona 41%. Texas 37%. Oklahoma 42%. Kansas 40%. Nebraska 38%. Minnesota 36%. Wisconsin. All the way across the country. The only places left are the Dakotas. And even North Dakota is 17%, which it was 14 years ago. South Dakota about the same. It was 24, now it's 25. That's it. The whole country has lost its religious identity. So when people start talking about Christian nationalism, I look at this and say, are you kidding me? We're not even Christian. Christians are now a minority in this country. 42% identify as Christian now. So there is a big mission field out there. We are in a church that has a tremendous history of fidelity to the See of Peter, of fidelity to Jesus Christ, and has such a wealth of prayer and devotion to offer to the world. So why evangelize? All right, Christ said so. We are obviously mission territory. If you neglect evangelization, your parish is going to die. If you've gone to Byzantine Catholic churches in the Northeast, churches that used to have 3 liturgies on a weekend have 1. Churches that had 6 or 8 altar servers have 1, if they're lucky. My sister came out to visit me at our parish. Our parish, we have so many kids, and she was so moved by the volume of children in our parishes. Up to 80% of the parish's children are going to grow up and move away for work. Up to 80%. We have to root them in our church to keep them in the faith. They're going to go a city that doesn't have a Byzantine church because we don't have enough priests. They may switch to another Christian Catholic church or another Christian faith or no faith. They will not automatically replace their parents. This is the big mistake they've made in so much of the Northeast. Thinking, they're going to all stay. No, they're not. We do our best job, but we have to do our best job. That's the challenge. An evangelizing parish is a parish that grows and learns. You have to teach the faith and learn the faith and know the faith. Eastern Christianity is appealing to many moderns. In Santa Fe, the Antiochian Orthodox Church up there has practically no Syrians in it at all. They're all converts. Our parish is heavily skewed towards converts and people of all kinds of ethnic backgrounds. And your parish here is as well, I'm sure. You got people like me and people like Father James. And then you have priests coming from Europe, like Father Artur, that, who has adapted so well to America and is such a successful missionary in Albuquerque. And that's what we need, a living, breathing church. It is very appealing to moderns. People are looking for spirituality. All those people back here, if you ask them, do they believe in God? Yes. The majority do. Only 7% of Americans are atheists. 93% have some kind of a faith. But they don't know where to go. They're looking for something that will welcome them and work with them and walk with them and love them. That's who we have to be. And there are Catholics looking for a spiritual home. My dad, passing out those booklets. Go to my son's church. Check out my son's church. He would say this to people. He'd say, he says, at my church, everybody shakes hands for the sign of peace during the Mass. Yeah, right, Hank. And he'd say, my son's church, they don't do the sign of peace. Oh, really? Yeah, but you know what? In our church, they all shake hands, but they run you over in the parking lot. At my son's church, they all go to the hall and eat. That was a big drawing card for people. The community that we have. Right? The building block of a parish is the community spirit. So what do we offer? 1,200 years of continuous worship in a church rooted serving people of all nations. My house shall be a house of prayer for all people. Remember all the ethnic groups I showed you at the beginning. A solid Catholic identity. We know who we are. We know who we are. It was formed by persecution, by the Orthodox, persecution by Roman Catholics, unfortunately, misunderstanding on the part of Catholics, always having to explain, why do you bless yourself that way? Why do you do 3 fingers up and 2 fingers down? Why don't you do 5 fingers out? Why do you bless to the right and the left? Why do you bow when you go into your church? Why don't you genuflect? Well, you always have to learn, right? You're always learning. You're always explaining this to people. Right? We have a solid identity. We have a great liturgy. What a liturgy. With a solid Eucharistic vision. If we priests were to go through our parish and ask people how many of you don't believe the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Holy Eucharist in our parish, all of our people in our Byzantine Rite parish are going to say, I believe Jesus is in the Blessed Sacrament. Of course, right, Deacon? Yeah. Whereas in the Roman Rite, at one point it was down to 30%. That's why they're doing that Eucharistic revival. Because they've lost that. We have such a great sense of the sacred. We have such a great solid Eucharistic vision rooted in the Fathers and in the Bible. We have a well-focused, healthy Marian devotion. People want a mother. People want a mother. And she is the mother of God and our mother. Small, healthy communities. People are desperate for community. Why do we still, our parish has a high school youth group. Most of them are from outside of the parish. We have a college group. None of them are in our parish. But they're drawn to us. Why? It's an era of anonymity, and communal loss. And COVID did a number on people, isolating them. Right? And we have small, healthy communities where if you don't come to church for 2 weeks, somebody's going to call you. Are you okay? People want community. So, some thoughts for an evangelizing parish. This is what I'm going to end with. Greeters. Have somebody at the door who welcomes people to come in. Hand them a book, ask their name, pass the name up to the priest and deacon so they can welcome them at the close of the liturgy in the announcements, and the greeter goes to that person after the liturgy and takes them into the hall. Introduce them around. This is so-and-so, they're visiting today. This is, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. A welcoming clergy. Clergy that welcome people. That are enthusiastic about new people coming. Information packets. Hand out stuff. Have stuff in the entryway. Give out materials to people. An active, up-to-date website. There's nothing worse than it is November, and you want to know, are they going to have a liturgy for Thanksgiving Day, and you go and it has the schedule from Lent the year previous. Everybody goes on the internet now. We all carry computers in our pockets and purses and briefcases. Everybody looks for the website. Literature in the narthex, a gift shop like you have here, with books and icons, a social hour like you have here. Right? A program in place to incorporate new members, to welcome people in. Right? Not hope they're going to find their way. Right? They got to be able to be welcomed and know they're wanted. Biggest thing in America today is the lack of feeling loved. The lack of having a community to plug into. Why are so many high school kids suddenly announcing they're trans or gay or queer or bi or whatever? Why? They created a community. And if I say that to somebody, these kids, I fit in. I have something I can fit into. It's just like sports teams. If I play football or basketball or baseball, I have a community to go to. Well, school ends. And then we go to work. And where are people working now? 30 to 40%, depending on the city, remotely. They don't even go in the office anymore. Robots are doing the assembly lines. People used to interact in those situations. We have got to be able to meet these people and find these people and love these people and welcome them into Christ's church. In a world that has changed almost overnight since 2019. You came here, you had 3 months to be a parish priest, Father James, and then everything got shut down and the world closed. Right? We've all gone through that. Now, how do we minister to these people? That's the great challenge. History is open-ended. It's not a done deal. We have a lot to offer that we can bring from our history to a world that is really aching to receive Jesus. All right, so thank you very much, and thanks for having us come out here today. Am I going to take questions? No, I'm done. I haven't seen a paycheck yet, so I don't know. Yes, sir.
2 questions. You used the term permanent diaconate. Is that really accurate, or is that more a diaconate that is seen not necessarily as transitional, but somebody who wants to stay a deacon without going?
Yeah, they want to stay a deacon.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that they're prohibited from going.
No, they are not prohibited from going on to priesthood.
So it's
and
more
in fact,
of a,
our first married priests in this eparchy were men who had been ordained as deacons,
right,
with the intention of staying as deacons. And then Bishop Gerald went to the late Father Brian Escobedo, who was here, and then Father Michael Mandelas, and asked them would they consider that. So,
okay, so it's not that they're barred.
No, they're not barred from.
Right.
No.
The other question is your very last bullet point there talks about thoughts for evangelization. I would suggest one more item in that bullet, and that's
it was perfect. You don't have to
invitation.
have
Invitation.
invitation.
Yes.
Yes.
Not just welcoming people, but inviting people in. Because I know there's been some studies and questionnaires that have been put out that said the biggest reason people wind up in a church is not because they're welcomed, but because they're invited.
Right.
And then when they come, they're welcomed and made to feel welcome.
I made you feel welcome. And this was I asked once in a sermon, at our parish, I asked people to put up their hand if they had been invited. Did they come to the parish because they had been invited? And it was well over half. Well over half. And in fact, there were people that day who had been invited by parishioners to come. Yeah, and I think we have Catholics in particular as a whole have a habit of thinking we should not invite. And that's wrong, because all of us have probably been invited to an evangelical or a Mormon church at one point in our lives. Right? We really need to do that. And again, you go back to that blue map. Those people who say they do not belong to a church now, they still believe in God. They still believe in the biblical God. But they don't know where to go. They don't know where to go. And they're not going to know where to go unless somebody invites them.
Come and see.
Come and see. Yeah. Jesus' very words.
Thanks very much, Father. I have a question about the last 50 or so years. It's a paradoxical history. I mean, in one sense, you can describe it as a period of great rebirth and flourishing as all the Eastern traditions come back into their own. But at the same time, it seems like a period of tremendous decline.
Yeah.
The church is diminishing by numbers, decade after decade. What happened? Why is it that at the same time that the church came back into its own sense of itself and its strength, and restored its liturgy and its spirituality and its traditions and its sense of itself, it also failed to pass on the faith to its children?
It's this, that they saw this. They saw the writing on the wall in 1947, which I really found fascinating. That why with this big rush, what happened? I think there was a failure on the part of many people to pass it on to their children. Our society changed fast, very fast, and we lost a lot. And there's been a collapse of religious faith in many parts of the world, outside of the communist bloc, for a variety of reasons. Media hostility, a small population that has a lot of influence, people losing their way. Father, you want to pick up on that?
Well, Blessed Fulton Sheen, I should say, Venerable Fulton Sheen, many years ago made a comment that he attributes this very thing of the loss of faith and this decline of religion as being directly associated with the use of the nuclear bomb.
With the use of the nuclear bomb.
Because that destroyed any idea of safety and stability, and it just shattered people's feeling of security.
That's
Because of that,
that it shattered people's sense of safety and invincibility, which is true. For a lot of us can remember, and for those of you who are younger than a certain generation, taking the bomb drills, and you knew where the yellow sign was that had where the shelter was. And I remember in 7th grade they did the drill that if the sirens went off, you went under your desk, duck and cover. Well, it so happened that on that day in our science class, they showed where the levels of destruction in a city, if a bomb landed on that city and had these circles radiating out. And I remember looking at the map and saying to myself, if that bomb lands on top of St. John's School, there is no desk for me to go under. And the idea was you would go under to be protected against the glass blowing in from the windows. And I thought, forget the glass. There's not going to be anything left here. This is ridiculous. And I said to the sister, I said, I'm sorry, sister, but this is ridiculous. And she said, you have to get under that desk right now. I don't know what's going to happen to you, Christopher. I don't know what's going to happen to you. That's insane. That's an interesting point. And Sheen was very much a prophet.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there have been other prophets too, like Father John Hardin also said that faith will disappear in most places in the world.
Yeah, faith will disappear in most places in the world. Benedict XVI said it'll be a smaller church, but a stronger church.
Yeah.
And you can't, whenever the church rules, it's never healthy. And Catholics have not had the opportunity to rule in very many places. So I guess we're healthy. But yeah, it's just really important, that we always be willing to grow. Yeah, and that the fact that there was this flowering liturgically, spiritually, theologically in the Byzantine Catholic Church in the United States, and yet the numbers went down. I mean, when I was ordained, there were 300,000 registered Byzantine Catholics. We barely are 100,000 now. But it's important that it did happen, because this is what we have to offer people. It is not a half-napul church, half and half. It is a church that is integrated and healthy. And it is a church that has a lot to offer. And so, the changes that happened were very much the work of the Holy Spirit, that our church was ready for a flood to come in. And it's up to us to create the flood by inviting people. So, Father.
You ever think about our eparchy? We have about 19 parishes, we have about 3 or 4 outreaches. You have, in that process, 19 priests. You have a number of deacons serving our parishes. If I know the chancery correct, if I understand the population of our eparchy, we only talk about 2,500 households.
Right.
How is it that you can have 19 priests serving 2,500 households and all these deacons? You have the Roman churches or the other churches, large parishes. One church in California could have maybe 3,000,
Oh,
8,000 households, and they have maybe a couple priests serving.
They won't even have that now.
Not even that. So, I mean, we're smaller parishes. We have priests, we have vocations. I think in comparing the two, we're doing something right.
Yes, we are doing something right, I think.
My
Yeah.
Roman Rite priest friends, I always tell them, I says, why are you building big churches? Why are you closing the local parishes? I know in the neighborhood I came from in Detroit, in Del Rey, there were 15 churches. We have, of course, our Hungarian Byzantine Church. You have the Hungarian Roman Catholic Church, the Polish Roman Catholic Church, the Irish Roman Catholic Church, the German, and so all those churches are closed. And then they have this one big church that's accommodating with. And we're doing. We kind of like underestimate ourselves.
We sell ourselves short. And like the parish I described, they used to have 4 priests. Now has 1 priest, but he's in charge of 6 churches.
Oh.
He has 6 churches. Each of those churches can seat 1,500 to 2,000 people. And he has 6 churches. He has 2 priests helping him. So they have 3 priests trying to keep 6 churches going. And the reason they're doing it the way they're doing it is they don't want to close anymore. Because once you close a church, you can never reopen it. Because the people don't trust the bishop. The church my grandparents knocked themselves out to build, or my great-grandparents, and now you closed it. And it's a lack of evangelization. I think that's been a big problem. And we're guilty of that. Because what did our churches do when the neighborhood changed? We fled. We pulled out. We don't want those people. That was what people said in Cleveland and Detroit and Pittsburgh, and towns in Pennsylvania. We don't want those people. St. Michael's Cathedral was built in a neighborhood that was all Slav in Passaic. The neighborhood I went back when Bishop Kurt was consecrated. I went back for his ordination as a bishop. And I hadn't been there since 1982. And it's all Salvadoran and Honduran and Mexican. And there's no Spanish liturgy at our church. There's no Spanish language at our cathedral. And they put up an 8-foot fence with razor wire on top of it around the parking lot. So yeah, welcome. Yeah, come on in. Right? Because they drive in from the suburbs, all these nice white people, and they park their cars in the parking lot, and they go to liturgy, and they go to the hall for coffee, and then they get in the cars and they drive home.
And then they lock the gates.
And then they lock the gates.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Because they're not acting like this.
Because we didn't want them. The wrong people. You know? And that's racist. Sorry. That's racist. It's a thriving neighborhood filled with all kinds of mom and pop stores. Yeah. You know, and parish I worked in New Jersey, St. Peter and Paul Elizabeth is now closed. It's a Syro Malankara church. Still a Catholic church, it's Syro Malankara. They're immigrants from India. Down the street is a big Polish church, same thing. People drive in, they go to Mass, they drive out. There's no presence to the Hispanic population there at all. It's a Polish-English parish. And we are guilty of doing that. When the neighborhoods changed and white flight took place in the 1960s, especially after all the riots in '68, no Byzantine clergyman thought about that. They didn't think about evangelizing the black population that was moving into these homes. So, I mean, you know, it's our own fault. And young people today do not like racism. They do not like, they have no patience for that anymore. That kind of attitude. Nor should they.
You mentioned that there was a Spanish liturgy in the 60s
Yes.
in Miami.
In Miami. And
And
I
yet-
had Spanish liturgy in Albuquerque.
And yet, just recently, there was a conversation that I had where it's, when are we going to have an official Spanish liturgy for us to use? And then I heard, well, we're working on one. It's like, why are you still working on something?
I have no idea why they do not have Spanish liturgy in the Eparchy of the Holy Protection of Mary of Phoenix, Arizona, the territory that used to be part of New Spain. It makes no sense to me. I had a Spanish liturgicon and a Spanish liturgy. I did the liturgy in English, Spanish, and Slavonic for years. You know, we used all three languages because I had three populations.
Yeah.
You know, I had Spanish speakers, I had Slavonic people who understood Slavonic who came from Europe after World War II, and I had, you know, the vast majority, you know, was English only. So, you know, we did a mix. Not necessarily the best way to do things, but it worked. You know, why we don't have an official Spanish liturgy, I have no idea. We did have one. We did have one, and it was, you know, successful, I thought. So, I don't have an answer for that one. Sorry. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Father. This has all been very fascinating. So, I have 4 young children, and when we came here, ECF was fantastic to me. Because I grew up Protestant, we had Sunday school, so ECF every Sunday was like loved it. But as I searched, there's not much Byzantine Catholic resources for children. There's plethora for Roman Catholics, Latin, but not really for Byzantine. And there's different nuances, right? So yes, I can give the children the regular Roman Catholic books, whatever, which is geared towards children, but there's different nuances that we have as
Right.
Byzantine Catholics. So is there a movement or suggestions for FRPs to start more like children's literature or things like that?
Are you in this parish? That's his problem.
There is a movement to bolster the extracurricular resources for families. One of them is a website called Busy Moms.
That's the one I was going to say. That's a good one.
Busy Moms, and I have put the website in the bulletin on a few occasions. I should I'll send out an email about that. But they have monthly newsletters with children's activities, especially based upon the liturgical life of the church. So that's
It's BYZIMOM. Busy mom.
Busy Moms, and then there's also Busy Moms for Busy Priests, which is a ministry that they have for praying for priests. So that I'll send that website out again, and bookmark it and subscribe to their. I think they have a subscription newsletter and things like that. So there's a recognition of that, and I also recommend going to the website of the Orthodox Church in America that has some resources for children, specifically about the Byzantine, or about the Eastern Christian traditions, and again, associated with the liturgical year. So
There's also Eastern Christian Publications, which is in Virginia, Jack Fiegel. He published my book over here. He has a number of children's items in his on his website that he's printed. Rebecca O'Loughlin, who is the sister-in-law of Father Michael O'Loughlin up in Sherman Oaks. Rebecca was working on making a Byzantine children's prayer book also, which would be really helpful because the last Byzantine Catholic children's prayer book has been out of print for quite a while. And Jack was...
they republished one.
They republished a little Molitvenik. Did you guys see that yet?
I've seen it, yes, and it's in Old Slavonic and English, side by side.
Yeah, it was how he got the copyright, I
Right.
think. So it's a children's prayer book that Eastern Christian Publications is selling. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if Father Artur was going to order it for, I don't know if it came yet to our church. Okay.
I think also God with Us puts out weekly kind of editable resources for children as a part of this is an inter-eparchial thing, right? God with
Yes.
Us.
Yes. God with Us is inter-eparchial, yes.
Yeah, so they put out editable resources every week for children, both for Ruthenians, Ukrainians, and outside
Right.
as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, they serve all three churches.
So this is a problem for adults too.
Yes, there's a new program called Becoming Byzantine that God with Us is sponsoring that's online. And that's really helpful for people that want to learn more about their own church as well as for people that are coming into the church.
Yeah, I'm involved with that with Father Dozier.
Right.
I guess part of it is that we need to be better at disseminating the information that comes to us. So a weekly or some compilation of information sent out would be useful, and that falls on me. So
Oh, okay. So it is his problem. Okay. All right. Okay.
okay, thank you, Father. Let's end with the prayer to the Mother of God that we traditionally we do at the end of every liturgy. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Beneath your compassion we take refuge, O Virgin Theotokos. Despise not our prayers in our need, but deliver us from dangers. For you are God, our pure and blessed. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. And as a small token of our appreciation, I know Father Artur was wondering about hearing confessions in the sun, but I guess you didn't actually have to do that. But if you had, we have a little, as well as our thanks for your spending the day with us and giving us your wisdom. I don't know what size head you have.
Big.
You have a big
I have a big head, go figure.
little there we go. So thank you very much, and again, many blessed years for the servants of God, Father Christopher and Father Artur. May God grant them health, happiness, visitation of the Holy Spirit, and many happy years.
God
grant them many years. God grant them many years. God grant them many blessed years. In health and happiness. In health and happiness. God grant them many blessed years. Thank you.
So Vespers is at 5 p.m.
Yes.
very soon. We'll come downstairs, we can hang out, have some snacks. I think dinner will be ready a little bit after 6:15, 6:20.
Okay.
And hope you can all make it. Chicken paprikash is the food with some halushki.
Oh,